again, but welcome. I'm glad that you all were able to take some time to join us today. Big topic, this artificial intelligence. And as you can tell by the title, we're going to be approaching it more from the human side of artificial intelligence and what we need to be doing as individuals and leaders out there to make sure we still bring that human connection in. And really, how do you leverage that to your ability here? So we are at the top of the hour. One of the things I always work with sales leaders and salespeople on is being on time. So we're going to start the webinar on time because one of the things about being on time, it sends a clear message not only to your prospects and customers that your time is valuable, but also sends a really clear message to your peers that, hey, I value what you do, your time as well. Now, a couple of things here as we go through the webinar today. I'm going to encourage you to send in chats if you've got a question or a comment, and perhaps even how you're using artificial intelligence. As I said, the webinar today is not going to be really focusing on the mechanics like Chat GPT, the prompts, all the ways that you can use artificial intelligence, but rather, how can we leverage the human component, the emotional intelligence skills, as we navigate through this next big change in technology and sales? So for those of you that are joining us for the very first time that have never heard of sales leadership, let me give you the 1 or 2 minute bio here. So I am Colleen Stanley, president of Sales Leadership. Julie Points, who's my wing woman, she will be the co-producer today, business development manager, and basically does everything I don't do. And that's a lot. And what we do here at Sales Leadership is we teach emotional intelligence skills to sales organizations, sales people, sales leaders, because our goal that really started almost, I'm going to say 13 years ago, was bridging what I call the knowing and doing gap. Because for many years, as a former VP of sales and as a sales teacher and consultant, I only taught the hard skills, consultative selling skills, hard management skills. And those skills are very important. I like to frame that up as the sales IQ. However, when I was introduced to emotional intelligence, I had this aha, and immediately I recognized this is the gap. This is the skills that will bridge that knowing and doing gap. 2 quick examples I always like to share. So all of us have heard that we're supposed to sell value, not price. However, you get in front of a pretty good negotiator, and we can get emotionally triggered and default to fight or flight responses, right? We either start getting defensive, overselling, over-justifying, or we flight, and then we end up discounting, even though we came from the meeting that just said, we sell value, not price. So that's one of the examples. I would say impulse control. So you're meeting with a prospect, it's going really well, they're sharing all their pain, and you're buying the buying signal. So instead of asking all the discovery questions, provocative questions, we can lose our impulse control and start offering solutions too soon, too often, even though every sales book out there will tell you to ask questions. So that's our mission, that's our goal in life. And frankly, as we've gone on this journey with emotional intelligence, I'm finding it more and more important on really creating healthy, happy sales cultures. Because I don't know about you, but I don't like working with grumpy people, and I certainly don't buy from them. So that's my anecdotal as far as why we're working with emotional intelligence. Now I'm going to go into the webinar here. I will let you know, again, encourage questions through the chat. Julie will help me keep track of those. But also, I'm going to be looking down at my notes a little bit more than I normally do, because artificial intelligence is such a new big topic. It's not like I've taught this particular webinar or set of concepts 500 times. This is a webinar I created for you. So I'll be looking also down to make sure I can get my PowerPoint to move, because for some reason, when we go on a webinar, it doesn't let me. So this is Julie and I, my wing woman from Red Rocks, Colorado. And let's talk about a question that's happening all the time. Will I be replaced by AI? And I really appreciate this quote from the Harvard Business School professor, Karim Lucani. I had to write it down this morning, so I'm going to be looking down. And his point was, we're not going to be replaced by AI, but we will be replaced by humans using AI. Now, I just recently listened to an interview, read an interview about an hour long, and there were really three main concepts I took out of that interview that I want to bring in today. His point, and he's been in technology for years at, Harvard Business Review, and a couple of points he said that companies need to be aware of. And I believe you joining as individuals need to be aware of, even if your company isn't embracing AI. Number one, it will require learning cultures, because no longer will learning be an option. So what that means for sales leaders is I'm going to encourage what I've always encouraged. When you are hiring people, vet heavily for their aptitude and attitude for learning. For the salespeople, individual producers that are joining today, I'm going to reference this book a couple of times, Deep Work by Cal Newport. And let me share with you what he writes from his research from MIT. He said 2 core abilities for thriving in the new economy: the ability to master hard things quickly, in other words, learn, and the ability to produce at an elite level in both terms of quality and speed. That is learning. But now the second point that was made during this interview with Kareem was, also, as we embrace this new technology, we are needing to teach our teams change management. And I've been wondering about this, thinking about it for years. So when we onboard people, we often teach them product knowledge, sales knowledge. We've got the technology, we get the legal. I believe as leaders and individuals, when we are onboarding new hires or maybe reboarding our existing hires, I'm going to suggest you take them through a workshop on change management. And I'm going to give you some stats later on in this webinar that might shock you, because if we don't teach your human beings how to manage change, they're going to get buried by it. So let's keep moving here. This is an interesting quote. The man who does not read has no advantage over the man who cannot read. And I hope you take a picture of that. Julie will be sending out the deck afterwards. But you think about it. I've heard more than one person say, I don't have time to read. I don't really like reading. Now, remember, I'm going to put reading. You can be listening to an audio, but it's deep studying. And so take a look at the slide here. Intellectual curiosity is the desire to learn more. And I've got to move my thing up here so I don't screw it up, about the world and find the answers to deeper questions. Now, in the EQ world, that's called self-actualization. And these are people that are always on that journey of personal and professional improvement. So I have been going to a few workshops, conferences around artificial intelligence. So I was at one 2 weeks ago. One of the Google executives was there. And as they were wrapping up this panel, they asked each person on the panel to share what's it going to take to be successful in this world of AI. The Google executive, intellectual curiosity was her answer. And so I wrote it down, and then when I got home, I thought, I don't think I know what that means. So let's explore what intellectual curiosity is. Intellectually curious people read, study, and think about how systems work. So when you take a look at this, see, many of us are we're moving at the speed of light, and half the time it's because of technology. You got Slack, you got chat, you got all these emails coming in, and research shows that for salespeople, they can spend 30% of their day reading emails. So let me read something else to you from Deep Work. And this one really got my attention. Cal Newport talks about the difference between deep work and shallow work. And here's what he's got to say about shallow work. So let's put it around some context. It's non-cognitively demanding work, logistical style. You can perform it while distracted. These efforts don't create much value, especially in the new world. Now, here's what really got my attention. If you spend enough time in a state of frenetic shallowness, emails, Slack, chat, you permanently reduce your capacity to perform deep work. So let's take a look at this human side. Yes, you can put in the prompts to Chat, GPT, Bard, whatever system you're using, but you're going to have to think about what that data means. What are the patterns? What are the trends? How does this relate to me? So my encouragement to you as an individual or a sales leader, create not only learning organizations, but thinking organizations. And to think, sometimes you need to slow down and literally on your calendar, plan out thinking time. But let's look at the second point under intellectual curiosity. They're really curious why people behave. So I love reading sales books. In fact, if you went outside my studio, you would see a shelf of sales books because there's so many smart people in this industry. But I'm going to encourage you to expand your horizons. How people behave means you may need to read a human performance book, a psychology book, maybe a spiritual book, because that's when you start putting all this data to become that great thinker by which AI becomes your assistant. And then let's take a look at the root cause. So often AI is really great to give you data. And I mean, let's even just look at the internet. It can give you data. But if you're really going to succeed to be that thought leader, to think beyond the data, we've got to look beyond the presenting problem. So let me give you an example. Now, you don't have to agree with my thinking, but what I'm doing is challenging people's thinking here. So there has been research from the Gallup Institute. So, they're the company that does a lot of the research on employee engagement. So a recent study showed that employee engagement has dropped from 36% to 31%. So that's the data. I was looking at the data and I started thinking anecdotally and then taking my world experience and everything else I read. And I thought, are 70% of the companies really terrible places to work? Are 70% of the companies being run by really lousy sales leaders, executives? 70%, because then I started looking at my own life and I thought, 70% of the people I meet with, and I meet with a lot of prospects and clients, they're not nasty, they're not jerks, they seem to be nice and well-intentioned. So where I'm going with this is maybe the conversation as I look at the data needs to change. Maybe as a company, if you want to raise employee engagement, you hire people that are passionate, because passionate people are more likely to be engaged. Maybe in your hiring process, you have to really vet this person to see, are they going to be happy in this role? Are they going to be happy at your company that moves at the speed of light? Doesn't make them a bad person, but it's not going to make them a happy person. But you know what? Maybe we do need to look at the companies. Why is this stat not changing? Well, a lot of times what I find, most of your leaders have never been trained in emotional intelligence skills, especially in sales. We're really good at sales forecasting, metrics, hit the KPIs. But you're not managing, as Mike Krasinski, the great coach, said, X's and O's. You're managing people. So maybe the engagement problem is lack of training, but not just on forecasting, but on people management. So I just share that example because I believe AI can bring you some data, but do not kid yourself. If you are going to be that deep thinker, that's how you're still going to provide value. You will not be replaced by a robot. Okay, so let's go to the next slide here. So why do we need to change? This was sent to a friend of mine. I just cracked up. To avoid extinction. So let's go back to the Harvard professor, Kareem Lukhani, and let's go back to what he said. You've got to have learning organizations and change management. So let's take a look at something I'm going to encourage you to study as an individual or as a sales leader. So remember, we onboard people and we train people, but how many of us are training people on how to handle change? And I have to tell you, it is happening rapidly out here. So again, I'm going to be looking at my notes here. So let me walk through the model first. So let me back up. So what happens with the change curve? First of all, we're in kind of denial, okay? And then we go down the change curve and we get to the bottom. Now, here's what I want you to look at. There's frustration, confusion, and doubt. These are human emotions because all of us right now might be thinking, Can I make it? Can I learn this AI? Am I going to learn it quick enough? Am I going to be replaced by it? Take a look at the writer's strike out there, right? There's probably some of these emotions going on. See, the quicker we can move through the change curve and make a decision, yes, I can leverage AI. I'm going to learn what I need to know. I'm going to still bring in the human component. See, the faster you get out of the bottom of the change curve, the faster you accept reality and take action. Now, here's some interesting stats that come from Dr. Nadia. She is the CEO of the Reinvention Academy. Her belief, and I agree with it, reinvention is a literacy skill, and it's one that needs to be learned because of all the changes of the 21st century. Literacy. So think about what she's saying. Reinvention is really that ability to manage change quickly. Now, here are some of the stats to back this up, why we can't ignore teaching people the hard skills and the soft skills of change management. According to her research, 20% of the companies have to reinvent every year. Maybe it's the way you go to market. Maybe it's selling into new verticals. Maybe it's new supply chain. But regardless, you're changing. So, wow, how are we going to help our human beings, our salespeople, navigate through these changes? Here's some other research from Accenture. From 2017 to 2022, there's been a 200% increase in disruption. Translation change, as compared to 2011 to 2016, only a 4% change. So as leaders, we need to take this seriously and start incorporating workshops. Now, EQ can manage some of that because a lot of what change is addressing the emotion of fear, self-limiting beliefs. So the fear is, can I change? The belief might be, I can't change fast enough. So there's things that EQ can help with, but it's also something called reality testing. That is an EQ skill. And it is the ability to look at things as they are versus as we want them to be. And the reality is AI is here to stay, and we've got to embrace it. You know, during COVID, many of us went through this change curve, and I ran into a colleague of mine at this AI workshop I went to, and she is a really nice person. But during COVID, she was holding back. She was in denial. And she was like, I'm just going to wait this out. And then she lost 6 months of business. And that's when she called me up. I shared with her what we were doing. What was interesting is that this AI event, we had a conversation. She goes, oh, I don't know. I just don't think I'm ready for this. And I thought, oh my gosh. Now, I'm not being critical. It sounds like it. But the curiosity in me was, what's holding her back? And there's probably some personal training she needs to do there, personal development. Okay, so let's take a look at another, what I like to call these folks, the brainiacs. Po Shen Lo, okay, he is a mathematics professor at Carnegie Mellon, and also you can see the national coach of the United States International Math Olympiad team. You will never find me doing that, by the way. Now, what he is on a mission to do, and he's going all across the country, speaking to students, is how do you win in the world of AI? So here's this very smart, logical person. But when you study what he's teaching and preaching, he is saying, bring in the human element. So let me give you some of the synopsis of when I've heard him in an interview. He was interviewed in the Wall Street Journal. First of all, he encourages people to think. Anybody getting a pattern here? Slow down and think. Think about what makes humans humans. And that is what you're going to add that AI, at least at this point, can. And the 2 points he made were empathy and relationships. Now, he also talks about problem solving and creativity. So I'm going to just address those for a minute, because again, the presenting problem is not the real problem. But when you take a look at creativity, you don't do creativity hurried and harried. So again, as organizations, if we know the way we're going to win and compete is just not trying to play catch up, we create and we find problems that literally our prospects and customers haven't even thought about. That's going to be the seller of the future. And in sales training, we call it future pain. And sometimes it's a harder sell because people, when you're looking out, you just don't feel the pain. So that is going to be something to really challenge your team with. Let's take a look at this data. What future problems could that create? And then bring those insights to your customer. But now let's take that deep dive into the two, empathy and interpersonal skills. I love this quote from Charles Eisenstein. And in an interview with Oprah Winfrey on her Super Soul Sunday, he just said, I always ask myself, in order to demonstrate empathy, is what's it like to be you? Now, with artificial intelligence, they've got some pretty good algorithms, can tell if a customer is upset, if they're feeling uncomfortable. But human beings really are the ones that spot the nuances. AI hasn't caught up with that. And one of the reasons we spot the nuances is because if you desire to be a more empathetic person, you are probably someone that has already learned the power of empathy and self-awareness. Because the old adage is, Socrates, know thyself. Because if you do not know yourself, well, there's a very good chance you're not going to be able to know other human beings. So take a look at this quote from Daniel Goleman. By the way, I'd recommend reading any of his books. If you're tuned out of your own emotions, you'll be poor at reading them in other people. So think about this. See, AI cannot really, it's not going to sit there and carve out the quiet time and say, okay, what triggered me yesterday? What emotion was I feeling? Why did I get triggered? What would have been a better response? Does it sit there and ask, what? I wonder if I was the cause of emotionally triggering somebody on a sales call or an inter-office call, inter-department call. See, the reason that human beings, the successful human beings, the empathetic human beings will be able to spot the nuances is because they're stepping into their own shoes before they try to step into another's. So remember, AI can probably spot your customers getting upset or frustrated, but it's only you that can say the words with the right tonality, the right facial expression that is going to diffuse that emotional state or have the person really understand, hey, I get where you're coming from. So one of the things we preach is avoid generic empathy. But I can tell you, if you don't take time to slow down and think about your own emotions, there's a really good chance that you are going to come across as superficial, kind of check the mark. And so let me give you a couple of stories on it, because I believe it's the best way to explain it. You can have somebody that comes to you and they say they're upset. But when you dig into it a little bit, you're studying their face, you're hearing their story, you're hearing the nonverbal. What you really recognize is that they feel unappreciated. And I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine years ago, teenage son, 17. Remember, nobody's brain's fully developed till 26. And on Mother's Day, he didn't give her a Mother's Day card. And she called up and she was angry. She was upset. She was frustrated. And after listening, I said, I think you're kind of feeling unappreciated. And I cannot tell you how that conversation changed. Yeah. Because see, when I emotionally connect with someone, it elevates the conversation. But how could I express that? Because there's been times I felt unappreciated, right, wrong, and different. I know what that emotion feels like. For salespeople, often when you're calling on a prospect and they might be hesitant, right? Or they're being defensive with you, or they express a frustration with an existing vendor. Well, you might be like, score, I've got a deal here. But I'm going to have you unpack that a little bit, because you know what? Sometimes when people are frustrated, the emotion behind that is also self-doubt. And self-doubt might be, I don't even know how to make a good decision. I vetted the other vendor. The other vendor asked and answered, asked smart questions. They answered, they were personable. And so if you can tap into that emotion, and I have literally said this on calls, if I were you, I'd be concerned I don't even know the questions to ask in order to properly vet me or anyone else. And I've had yeah. So then we can go into a different conversation, but it's only because I'm reading the subtleties. That's something AI can't do. So let's keep moving and let's talk about interpersonal skills. All right. So interpersonal skills, when you take a look at this definition, makes a lot of sense. People with good relationships, it's the number one predictor of happiness. Every report out there, you can study. However, here's what I've also seen in the world of sales. When you have good interpersonal skills, you've got relationships, not only with your customers, but with a lot of your partners. But let's talk about the curse of the 21st century. We are hurried, we are harried, and we are not spending enough time developing relationships. So it was interesting. I was on a podcast yesterday, and he asked me the question, well, what do you think's missing? And I said, well, I don't see people leaving their offices. They're not going to association meetings anymore. They're not having coffees with non-competing vendors. Why? Because you got a 45-minute commute. And he goes, well, yeah, that is kind of hard. Really? And so we have to be emotionally self-aware of when we're trying to build relationships, but we're not willing to put in the work. So let me show you a picture on this next one. So this is from my former company, Varsity. And hopefully you can see my arrow here. Right here, one of the things I believe we can do a better job of at companies to build relationships. Again, Gallup has the research. If you have a best friend at work, we're happier at work. We're more likely to stay. These two women were mentors of mine in my early years. And then Angie Stevens was my top rep. And more than once, I would call Betty and Lynette. I'd be confused. I'd be like, how do I sell this? I got an upset customer. These two women always took the time to walk me through whatever question or challenge I had. That's called interpersonal relationships, because processes are efficient, people are not. But in our harried world, we're texting people instead of picking up the phone. Zoom calls are fine, but if you're local, get in your car, go have lunch, go meet people, build your network, because your network is your net worth. And so these other pictures you see is I always encourage companies in this day and age of remote hybrid working, and I had 130 reps that were remote. You can have community, you can have culture, but you need to create moments by which we build friendships. So we always had 3 meetings a year: a regional meeting, a national sales meeting, and an incentive trip. And I can tell you, many of my reps are still friends today. Retention makes you money. Relationships make you money. And let's look at one more point here, because in the day and age of technology, I'm going to tell you, Chat GPT, it'll blow your mind. It can do lead scoring, write your emails, write out a good cold call. But you know what? It can't make the cold call, can't follow up after the email. So go online, go to a course. It's terrific. But here's what we're missing. Sometimes the quickest way to cash is a warm introduction from either your clients, where you've asked for the introduction and they're happy to give it because you have a good relationship, you've gone above and beyond, or you've got non-competing vendors that are partners. And because you've taken the time to meet, you've given them introductions, you've taken the time to learn their business, you've built reciprocity here, you're going to build a pipeline, but you're also going to increase your close ratios, because the research is pretty constant that a warm introduction increases your close ratios by 10 to 50%. Interpersonal skills. A robot can't take you to lunch or breakfast or meet with you for networking. So don't forget the good old-fashioned stuff that still works. So as we wrap up today, I would encourage you to take a look at how emotional intelligence skills are going to help your team navigate through this changing environment. Increase of 200% in disruption. I've got a few of these. So we administer an emotional intelligence assessment. These are the 5 composites. Do you have self-actualized people on your team? How well are they scoring on interpersonal or empathy skills? As Po-Shen Lang said, the problem solving, flexibility is going to be huge, optimism. So if you're looking to get a better view on who you have on hand or who you're going to hire, I encourage you to take advantage of our offer here. So you can, I think, Julie, they just scan this. Is that right? I usually screw this part up.
Yes.
Yeah. And so what we do is if you go online, you'll see this is like for $4.97, but we really want people to get familiar with EQ because I do believe it is going to be some of these soft skills, essential skills that's going to help your team navigate. So with that, Julie, unless we've got some questions, happy to stay on as long as you need. Here's how you stay connected with us. LinkedIn, we've got a bi-weekly vlog. Go to our website, lots of free resources there. We encourage you to take advantage of those. So I welcome any questions, comments, lessons learned. My goal was to really get you thinking because I believe to succeed in an AI world, we all need to become better thinkers by which to make sense of the incredible amount of data we're going to have at our fingertips.